Hey everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our 22nd Masterclass. We're going to be continuing last week's project where we're actually building a home region. So if you haven't watched that one, I would recommend just getting up to speed on that one first if you want to know what's going on. So this week, we're just going to continue where we were last week. As you can see here, this is the region that we built in last week's tutorial. We still have quite a lot more to go here, but we will sort of endeavour to get this one up to scratch during the course of this week. So what we're going to do is at the end of last week we just continued on doing a little bit with these trees. We actually edited them directly in the Unity tree inspector, so you can actually pull those back up because I'm still not quite happy with these. So we'll select that tree, edit. So if you were watching last week, you would have seen that we had been using the Unity tree editor to actually edit the tree directly, so we built the trunk of it procedurally. Now I wasn't quite happy with the foliage, so I actually went hunting for some trees in the Unity Asset Store that were free, and I haven't actually looked at these yet. Now unfortunately these were built as single models. They weren't using the Unity Tree Builder, which is a bit of a shame, because while Unity Tree Builder has some issues, it does also handle some things nicely, particularly with how it works within the terrain system. So I'm just going to have a quick look through here and see if I've got some more ones, because I would like to better use some slightly better looking trees here than the ones we've got access to. Get out of, okay, all right. Quick scan through this list. I'm sure we can find something in here that's nice. You might work. What I'd like to do is just get a nice branch model, but that might be a bit of a... Okay. Alright, so I guess I'll just leave those alone for the minute. We'll come back to those in a sec. Now one of the things you will be noticing is that as I fly around here, the trees sort of pop into view. Now that's the billboarding system that's built into the tree system, and it basically allows us to put tens of thousands of trees within a terrain without the viewer exploding in a shower of nuts and bolts. Now we can also do that through something called instancing, but today we're not going to cover that because that's a much more advanced topic and it sort of deserves its whole class to itself. What we can do though is reduce, one, the distinctiveness of how this fades in. As you'll see, things like the shadows popping in and whatever are a little bit undesirable. Now what we can do is we can actually increase the distance and the maximum number of mesh trees we've got visible at once versus billboards. So right now it's set that no more than 50 will be displayed at once. I don't think that's the hard limit we're seeing here. As I increase this number, we won't see the numbers pop in and out. So I'm just going to set this to 50, and I'm going to, thank you for that, I'm going to set the billboard start to from 50 up a bit further. And as you see, the trees are getting a little bit more solid. So the advantage of doing things a little bit further away is that it's not quite so noticeable that they're popping into place, which is good, because generally speaking, players come from a perspective around here-ish, so it's not too bad if it's just in the distance that they're popping in and out. The shadows are not really ideal, and we can get around that using baking, but we can also edit the shader itself, which may be something like I take a crack at in a minute. What I am going to do though is increase the fade length. So you notice even far back, they do have a brief period where they kind of transition in. I'm going to increase that fade length from 5, I'm going to increase it to 30. Not quite ideal, but we're getting better. I'm just going to lower that start distance back down to 50. Just have a look at this. Okay, so the main thing we just need to sort out is the shadows. Now the reason that's happening is because the Unity billboard shader that comes with Unity is actually quite old and it doesn't have a shadow pass, which is a little bit less than ideal. We potentially can add one into the tree billboard shader. For those who are coming in here and don't know what a shader is basically a small program that represents how an object is rendered on the screen, and you can write your own ones. I actually covered that in the previous masterclass, building your own shaders from scratch. But today we're not gonna really cover those. or we might cover them when we get to that. Okay, so I'm just going to increase the fade length back up to, sorry, the billboard start length back up to 100. That will be a bit better. What we want to get to is a point where there's no popping. Next thing we want to do is probably just play around with adding a wind zone here. As you can see here, these trees are completely static. They're just a solid object. That's not really ideal. And what we can do is we can add a wind zone. So you just go game object, 3D object, and then wind zone. And as you can see here, the trees are now rustling in the breeze. And when we select the wind zone object that was added to the scene, as you can see, it's just gone down here. I'm going to use the Control-Shift-F command just to move it to my orientation. Now you can see that's sort of where the wind is coming from. It's a bit jiggly, and that's partly the tree settings that we set, so we'll probably edit those a bit. We've also got some settings we can control here, so we can actually set to sort of gale force winds if we want to. That is obviously, as you can see, quite unrealistic. I'm just going to edit this tree, and we're going to set the the wind settings to be something a little bit more sane. Okay, so the first things first is those branches. We need to lower the amount of wind they've got. Main wind, I'm going to set that to 0.1. It's going to freeze up on me as it rebuilds the tree. The tree system, unfortunately, is quite old and is needing a bit of a renovation. Hopefully, we won't lose our project. It'll be a first for a masterclass. Would be having Unity crash in on us. I think it's just taking some time. So what we're doing here is we're just influencing how much this particular part of the tree is influenced by the wind itself. So by setting this from 0.5 to 0.1, the trunk of the tree is not going to be impacted by the wind so much. So you can still see that there is a bend on the trunk, but it's now reduced from what it was before. We're going to take that all the way up. So I'm just going to actually just drop the tree into this scene first. I'm going to edit this one. Okay, and go to you, and we'll just change the amount of wind we've got on this guy. Also going to lower the turbulence. Now the turbulence impacts on how much the turbulence impacts how much the random motion is applied. So I'm just going to set this one to 0.1 as well, because it's a I probably shouldn't place these on the terrain because it's making things run a little bit slower than they need to. Okay, and finally we'll get to the leaves. Now the leaves, I'd like the main wind to be a lot more visible, but I want less edge turbulence here. So I'm just going to set this one down to about there. I'll set that main turbulence down a bit as well, and I'll set the main wind up. Okay, there we go, that's a bit more natural. Okay, so now I've got a bit more of a natural rustling here. It's much more bound by the trunks swinging back and forward. Now we have these ugly things on here that I added, so I'm just going to knock those out. They were added to here, I think. I'm trying, where did I add these? It was the material I used. I think, yes, it's the reason why we've got those wood beams in the end is just because we don't have a tree texture that works. So I hopefully have a tree card for the leaves that works okay. This looks like it might. Oh, this has come from SpeedTree, I think, but that will work. So I'm just going to add a new material here. I'm going to create a material. I'm going to call this course leaves from Masterclass, so I can actually find it later. And we just need to make sure this is running one of the nature shaders. That's quite important when a tree is used with the built-in Unity tree system, because it only works with the nature shaders. So we'll just go to nature shaders and we'll go tree soft occlusion leaves. I believe that should work. Okay. In fact, no, we'll go to nature tree leaves. There we go. And I'm just going to drop into here, probably his desktop, into the base. There. Actually, maybe this is not quite thick enough. We'll find out. And that's my normal map. The normal map. Okay. Bit bumpy, but might pull you out. Okay, now this one's probably not ideal, but we'll have a look. So I'm just going to grab my tree again. I'm just going to also quick look through this direction because I've got conifer. Maybe that's a better one. Yeah, in fact, you might be better. So I'm just going to create new material, do exactly the same thing here. Okay, nature, tree fit leaves, and conifer needles. Okay, that worked. All right, so let's grab our tree again. Okay, and you will swap for conifer. Give it a second. The reason it's taking a while is because it's updating a whole bunch of textures whenever you use this. The tree creator will automatically create atlases for all the materials and things that you're using automatically, which makes them quite efficient to render, but it also means that they can take a moment to edit, particularly if you've got a lot of things imported into your project. Okay. That to me is not quite looking like an actual conifer, but it's certainly better than it was before. I think it's just that this, well, maybe it's just too thick. I don't know. Have a look at the foliage. If I set that from across to just a plane, that'll lower the amount of I should kind of like it a bit thicker. What we might do is just play with the size though. The size, but I'm going to lower the frequency. Don't quite know if that's... yeah, screw it, we'll go all the way up. It'll be very lush. What we are seeing now is that the trunk patterns are probably a bit too, need to be higher frequency as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, where is this? I'm just going to duplicate this leaf pattern. Now this tree is probably getting quite performance heavy, so we might need to pull some things back, but I'm just going to apply these leaves to the top branch as well, because as you can see it's sort of sticking out like a radii antenna and we don't really want that. So I'm just going to wait for that to duplicate. Which might take some time. time than I would like. I feel like I should be having a second copy of Unity open at once and just tabbing between them. I think what we've done is we've overloaded it with too many branches, and now it's probably on swap. Come on. It's doing something. Sorry about this, I think I've locked it up while it's decided to rebuild half the tree. If it does take too long, I will just kill it. I think it actually is doing something though. What I may do is I may just edit this tree outside of the terrain system, just so it might run a bit faster. It probably will finish up, but I'm going to kill it for now. We'll just restart that small edit then. You know what we're doing? Which Unity editor are you? So it's fun figuring out which one's which. It's you. There we go. Reopen that project. Sorry about that. That's a first for me. Just give it 1 second to re-import. This would also be a small lesson that it is worth saving periodically. This doesn't happen very often, but it does happen now and then. As I said, Unity probably would have unfrozen eventually, but I didn't feel like waiting the 5 minutes it was going to take before it actually did that. So just give it a moment, reopen that project, and obviously deciding to do something. Whenever Unity does crash like that, it does actually attempt to re-import and reload the project to make sure that actually is set up correctly and that nothing got corrupted, but it can take a second. We should have given it a little bit longer. Come on. Seems like it's in a loop stuck reopening that file. There we go. All right, that took way too long. And it looks like most of our changes actually did stick. That's good. What didn't stick though was the change to the terrain. So I'm just going to set that fade length back up to 30, and we changed the billboard start. Oops. Billboard, that was 30. Billboard start was 100. Max mesh trees was set to 100 as well. Oops. Okay, I'm just going to go grab these again. All right, trees. Okay, now I'm just going to save this scene first. I'm just going to make a new blank scene just so I can edit this one in peace and quiet without it deciding to do anything stupid. Okay, let's go back to this one. Right, now I wanted one, I want a bit more on here, so I'm just going to duplicate this one. So we're going to set this to conifer. I need to reload that material too. Right, feature, tree cut leaves. So we have that one and that one. Okay. Okay. And finally, I'm going to do this one more time. Incidentally, you can see all these little white nodes around the place when you edit a tree. One of the things you might want to consider messing with, and I'm just hoping this doesn't do this again. There we go. So, yeah, this is now getting a bit lighter. You can actually individually grab those nodes and move them around. Now, when you do that, it will lose all its procedural properties, but it does let you manually position and edit the trees. So I'm just going to move those onto the main trunk, which is what I've done now. And now you notice that we've actually got patches of these guys coming off the trunk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the frequency quite significantly. I'm going to set that to random positions and increase the frequency quite a bit. That means we should get some off the top, even as we build this thing up. And I might just increase the size of these guys. And those should be set. I'm going to just set those so that they follow towards the sun too. We can do that with the alignment settings on that. So just go perpendicular line. As you can see, we can manipulate these horizontal align. I believe with the growth angle we can control the just want them to not dig down quite so much. Okay. Finally, this branch, I'm just going to increase the frequency of these from 22 up to 32. Now, if you want to watch the start of me building this tree, it was covered at the very end of the previous week's masterclass. Okay, all right. Not quite sure that's right, but it'll do. Okay, so we've made our edits there, and I'm just going to go back to my home scene. One of these guys should have updated with the change that I just made. Cool, they have. So that's the start of our little forest. I'm not happy with that texture resolution, so I'm just going to be pretty much flipping through this, editing them to make the scene look better at the time. So I'm just going to increase the size of this, which will... Yeah, that's better. Okay. Now, one of the other things we want to do besides trees is obviously getting some grass in here. Grass follows a couple of ways. Now, you can either do mesh grass or you can use billboard grass. Billboard grass is quite fast, and you can find that under the details tab of the terrain. So if we just go add grass texture, we can create billboard grass. And I'm just going to search for a nice grass material. Something like one of these will do the job. You can see it's sort of an alpha cutout texture. Now, one of the things you've got to watch out for is this healthy dry color stuff. It over tints the objects. So if I paint some down right now, which I'm going to do, I'm just going to paint a small patch of grass. So the opacity to 1. Whoops, I need to add this first. Okay, now we're going to paint this one down. As you can see here, it's sort of got that ugly, sickly fluoro green, and that's because it's got this color coming in here. You probably don't want it. For the most part, I find that using these kinds of values work better. So I'm just going to go something like that. Now this texture itself is probably a bit green too, at least for this terrain. So I'm just going to flip between a few of these and see if I find one we like. There is a whole bunch of free ones in the Unity Asset Store too, incidentally. Right. Just going to erase all this. Okay, now let's try some in the little grove that we've got down here as a demo. I'm going to set the target strength not up that high. As you can see, the higher target, even 0.25 there, is quite strong. I'll try something quite. Okay, that is all still a bit heavy, but let's have a look through here. I might also change the size. Now we can do that pretty easily just by editing these values. In fact, yes. As we make these smaller, we may need to boost the target strengths and things, just to give us what we want. Color on this is still not quite right. We may be able to edit this through playing with these values. Let's edit both of these values though. Just want to get this a little bit less saturated, more in that greeny tone we've got here. Now down here where the grass texture is underlying a little bit darker, we may do the same thing, just with a different texture or a different color combination. I'm just going to grab another grass. We've got some drier grasses here, so I might grab a U. I'm just going to do the same thing. Let's have a look what you look like. Okay, it's still too thick. We want a much lower target strength on this one, I think. Nope, a bit lower than that. Now, if we don't get the colors exactly right, there is some magic we can do with color grading. It's not a complete fix-all, but and I prefer to get the scene sort of looking natural before we start really trying to mess with it through color grading. But that is an option if we don't particularly feel like colors are quite right on a more global level. It's an interesting one. I don't know what resolution that is originally, if it was actually originally that small. Set to 64 though. Let's just try and see if this was actually high resolution originally. Certainly looks like it was. And a standard one. Not ideal, but not terrible either. We might just mix that in with a little bit of the other one. And again, this texture is just a bit low resolution, so I'm just going to knock the repeats down. I think it was this guy. Okay. It's a bit of a... Now we are going to run a riverbank down here, so I might actually just clean this up a little bit further. I'm just going to lower the brush size and start messing with some of this. Oops. I'm just going to take some out of the river as well. Do reeds and such, but I'll do those explicitly. Paint a bit more of the green on this side. Might increase the target strength of this guy a little bit. Okay, we can't really see what we're doing, we can just switch off lighting. Just get a bit of a clearer picture on here. Okay, I'm just going to paint a bit more of the green onto this section as well. Just where the green bits are. Make the grass look a bit more natural as well. Okay. Next step, I guess. Got that sort of right. I might play with the lighting in here a little bit. Now, one of the things you want to do when you're playing with lighting is set up a temporary camera in the scene that you can just use to look through. So as you can see here, I've just placed a camera. I'm going to align it with view, and now I can switch to the game tab and see things. But this is also a way of previewing post effects, so you can see what the scene will look like when it's actually been rendered. I'm going to add a couple of things to this. I'm going to first add a post behavior. This is going to let us preview the. I'm just going to grab the home scene folder. I'm just going to make a new post profile, space processing file. We've got home scene post. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to add a volumetric lighting component to this as well, just because I want that sort of nice, nice raycasting. Now you have to actually hit play to be able to see these, but I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so volumetric light renderer. Resolution. Okay, now where's the fractional light? Should be here. Sun. Just gonna add a volumetric light to it. Now, let's go to here. So I've just got the two things set up here, just so we can get a good look at this. Okay, now I'm just going to hide the landmark, and the reason I'm hiding the landmark is because I don't want to actually spawn a player character when I hit play. Sometimes you do want that, just so you can walk around the scene and make sure it looks normal, but in our case we don't. But what we are going to do is we're going to just play with all these settings and get them right, and then we'll copy them back to the play mode afterwards. So that's my camera. I'm just going to drop the home scene post in here. By default, that's not going to do a thing, but we'll turn on anti-aliasing. That's the first thing we're going to do. We set it to FXAA, and we're going to set the preset to extreme quality. That's just going to turn on anti-aliasing, as you can see here. Blurs it a little bit. Ambient occlusion, I'm generally going to avoid. It's got too many random issues for it to be enabled. We don't have really much in the way of reflective things here, so I won't bother with screen space reflections. We probably will do some depth of field. As you can see here, we just need to get the value right on the focus distance. Alright, we won't do motion blur on this one, but sometimes it's a useful one to have. Bloom we will do. Now bloom is basically the effect of light bouncing around inside a camera, and it basically causes bright things to glow. So if I want to see this a bit more lush, we'll overdo the bloom a little bit. But I'm going to soften E will basically describe how far it's going to blur. When it does the bloom, and the radius we can play with as well to do the same thing, but I'm just going to leave that at 4. I'm going to tick on the anti-flicker. It lowers the intensity of it a little bit, but means you get less random noise attached to it. I won't put any lens dirt in this scene. Now color grading is the big one. We've covered this before briefly. There's a couple of ways of doing color grading on the scene. We can actually play with the various tone mappers. That's basically controlling the amount of light and things in the scene, so you can brighten things up a bit or not. We can play with color temperature, so if we want to go for a bit more of a warmer scene, and we should always just be a little bit careful to test around the scene a bit when we do this, because for instance this might not look as natural in a warmer environment. And we can actually manually tweak this as well, so we don't need to worry just about the temperature and things. I do actually like the slightly warmer. We can boost the saturation, or we can trim it back. Oops, set that to 1. And play with contrast. Now contrast is something to be very careful of. It doesn't always look as good as you think it does, particularly when you've got avatars in the scene. We can also play with the trackballs to basically, for instance, I can make this more green in the mid-tones. Which will give us the results we're looking for. Now, this is best to do with a reference image handy of what you're trying to achieve. I strongly recommend doing that. Finally, if you're going to be really going into the dirty bits, you play with the grading curves. Now, the grading curves will give you complete control over the scene. So we can go from here, here, and if I want to make those greens really quite strong, maybe not those greens, sort of begin to play with this stuff, but I'm just going to hit reset there and not mess with that too much. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to play with the volumetric lighting. Now this just adds sort of fog beams to the scene. It's worth doing on scenes like this because you can get some really impressive effects. Okay, so we've got our basic scene there. I've got the volumetric light renderer. I've got it on the sun. We'll save. I've got my lesson from earlier. I've got the volumetric light attached to the thing. Now I'm going to need to hit play in order to be able to actually preview this. It does not preview directly in the editor, and that's something we can perhaps look at fixing in a future editor pack update, but for the moment you do need to hit play. And it's gotten quite bright, which I'm willing to bet is almost certainly this. Yep, it very much is. Okay, so our fog is quite intense. Now, first things first, I'm going to up the sample count. If you've only got one in the scene, setting the sample count to 64 is perfectly fine. What we are going to play with is the scattering coefficient. And we're also going to let it not nuke the skybox quite so much. So I'm going to set the skybox coefficient to there. We've got this. So look at this through this scene. That's probably way too bright, but we'll just get a good look at this. Make sure it actually looks normal. What we can do is also go back to the post and enable eye adaptation. And when the eye adaptation's on, we can actually have brighter and brighter things far off in the distance, because as the camera moves around, the overall intensity will shift. So that if we're looking at, for instance, a dark patch like down here, and we twist around, it should actually adjust the brightness automatically. It's not quite going high enough, and there's also an issue with the background shader here. As you can see, the trees there, the billboards are set incorrectly, which is due to the billboard shader, and I did say I would get into that at some point, which we probably will in a minute. Okay, so I'm just going to keep tinkering with this until it looks quite right. It's close, but it's still probably a bit too strong in the background there, so I might set that to something like that. It's bright, but it's not unreasonably so. In fact, if I set the scattering coefficient higher and I knock you back, and then we'll take the noise off. So it's just a matter of tweaking these until you get them exactly the way you want. So I don't want to darken the scene too much, which is what this is doing. That's obviously scattering a fog that's not very, that's quite thick like smoke, but we don't really want that. You can play with the skybox coefficient there to mess with that accordingly, but we don't really want that kind of effect here, so I'm just going to set the skybox to not scatter very much, and we're going to just keep playing with this until it's quite... What I want is sort of fog beams, but I don't want it to be overpowering, which is sort of two conflicting goals here. So as you can see there, we've got the fog beams now, but they're not quite the way we want them to be. This is just all a matter of tweaking it until we get it right. We can also use height fog in order to achieve these effects. So this one I can make quite strong, but I can use the height fog to basically lock the fog to a particular height range. So if I do that and then set the ground level, as you can see here, we can create something that's actually only affecting the areas on the ground. So when you get further up, for instance up here, we've got basically no fog. Down here, we have quite a lot. Now that's probably, again, not what we want. We'll just flip that back off, and I'll get my camera back into a spot where I can actually see what I'm doing. That tree back here was a good target. And I'll just poke this a little bit. Okay, now we're happy with this. I'm just going to right click, hit copy component. That way it'll copy the settings. And now when I hit play, everything reverts. I'm just going to hit paste component values. Okay, and that's now set. Probably the last thing I'm going to do is that while my camera's over here, is I'm just going to go a little bit more on the color grading. This is where I'm going to take things into the blue end of the spectrum a bit, because I feel like the coloring here is a bit off. So I'm just going to go back to the post profile, and these changes will persist as you make them. I guess we'll go with that golden. That actually looks quite good. Great, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, now the last thing we need to do is fix up these billboard shaders. So as immediately you'll notice that the tree billboards are completely wrong. This is unfortunately a problem with Unity itself. The default tree billboards actually don't emit what's called depth writing, so they don't actually write into the depth buffer, which is a problem that I've always been wondering why they do that. Thankfully, this is an easy thing to fix. So we're actually going to grab the Unity default shaders. And you can grab those off the Unity download archive. And if we go to here for Unity 2017.2.2, which is the one we're using currently, we can grab built-in shaders. Give it a second. This is a small package, so I'm just going to grab here. Okay, folder. Okay, and just on your computer, so I haven't actually loaded my registration on that one. Okay, all right. I'm just going to grab the shaders we need. So the ones we want are nature shaders, I believe. It's one of the terrain shaders. There we go. Just going to grab the terrain shaders out of here. Drop them into here. Now I've got our terrain, and the ones we want are trees. The billboard tree shader. This is the one we don't particularly like. I'm just going to refresh. I have this switched off. You guys probably don't. So Unity would have normally picked that change up, but I've got it set to only do it when I ask, which is a setting in the Unity settings. As you get really big projects, not on the scale that you guys are dealing with, it becomes helpful not to force Unity to do a reload every time you tab, because it can get quite painful. Okay, so we're just going to go into our tree shade now. The reason why this causes problems is visible all the way here. So the first thing we've got a problem with is the transparent order. So Unity, when it renders things, it renders them according to an internal order. So it renders opaque objects first. Actually, before that, sorry, it renders the background, the skybox first. Then it renders opaque objects. Then it renders alpha cut objects. So those are ones using cutout shaders. Then finally it renders transparent shaders, and then at the very end it renders what's called overlay shaders. And there's not too many of those, but things like lens flares fall into that category. Now in this case, it actually uses an order that's a little bit wrong. It uses the transparent order instead of the normal order. So that actually means that one transparency is a little bit off on the billboard shaders. So I'm just going to edit these. So I've just changed that from transparent minus 100 to just transparent. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Z-Write, which means that it's actually going to render into the depth buffer. I'm going to leave culling off. For now. In fact, that may not be a good idea. I'm going to go... Actually, no, culling's fine. It's the Z-test I was worried about. Okay. That should do the job. Okay, now when we go back to here, we should be able to see that that has fixed the issue in the background. In fact, we won't see because I haven't refreshed, but as soon as I do, I will see the difference. So I'll get into a position where we can actually see this broken. Here will do. We're going to go fresh. Okay, and hopefully I fix those, but if not, we'll just need to poke it again. Make sure it's actually using these shaders. And we can test that very quickly by just going to go out of play mode. So I've still got billboards there visible. I'm just going to change this color slightly. I'm going to set color where they equals 1.0. I guess they are. It is in use. I might need to do a little more poking with this shader to get it to behave, but let's have a look here. Just want to make sure this is writing to the depth buffer correctly, because that should fix the issue with volumetric fog on it. No, there's still something wrong with it. Okay, let's try and change the render order here a little bit. We're just going to mess around with it until it gives us exactly what we want. I think that might be the correct order, but I'm not 100% sure. That looks better. How's it looking here? Okay, so this just needs to be moved into the alpha clip layer, which I'm actually not 100% sure what the order is. Unity 3D render queue. Okay, so the render queue is, in fact, that's the wrong one. We've got subshader tags for the render queue. And what we want is called alpha test. And that just means it behaves like a cutout texture as far as rendering order goes, which should be fine. And one of the things that will also fix is interactions between terrain billboards and transparent objects. You may notice that occasionally they screw up. That is the reason why. So if you're interested, I can actually share this shader, but the key things we changed was just changing the alpha test queue. We set it to Z-Write, and that is it. Not very much to do, and that fixes that there. Okay, all right, moving on. Next thing we might want to mess with is just adding some rocks and trees, rocks to complement the trees. As you can see here, this terrain is unnecessarily smooth. That is an issue that we probably need to roughen up a bit, and we can do that either through using the raise and lower tool with a low opacity and a very dirty brush, like for instance one of these guys. That is a process that takes a bit of time though, and I find that the flatten tool works a bit better. Still, that only gives you half the problem solved. One of the big issues here is just because it's a height map, there's only so much you can do as far as sharp edges go, because at the very minimum you're going to be hitting problems where you get hard edges and things pointing on here. The actual solution is to use rocks and to basically layer down lots and lots of rocks. So I have a rock pack here. I don't know where I've got this one, so it came with the Gaia. And as you start planting down lots and lots of them, it will do the job. Now, you may have noticed on a previous, whoops, should probably not be in play mode when doing that. One of the things you may have noticed on previous masterclasses is I used a tool in order to place those down. I think I used, can't remember the exact name of it, but what has come since that tutorial is that Unity have bought and released polybrush. Now polybrush lets us place down things the same way I was doing before. I think it was a quick brush, that's what I was using before. Unity have this new tool. We can use it for painting prefabs. So what I can do is I can just drag a bunch of prefabs into here. For instance, these three. And I actually forget the exact tool, which is it? It's, I think it's Control. Sorry, I'll have to look these things up. I haven't used this one very much yet. Where is the prefab? Prefab thing. Okay, I may come back to this next week once I've actually learnt the tool. It's good. If anyone does know that, feel free to let me know, but I'll come back to that one. So we'll cover that next week. But basically, the idea of using these painting tools instead means that you can paint lots and lots of them very quickly, and it gives you the effect of actually getting lots of rocks in and things in the scene. The other thing you want to do is also play with scale. I'll switch Prograde Snap tool off there. What you can do is just quickly resize and rotate, and you can make walls of rocks pretty easily. Even if you've got like just one rock like this, there's not a lot of similarity between those two there. And if you start rotating them around and messing with them, you don't know that you've actually only got one single prefab in use here. You can get away with a lot of repetitions without it being so plainly visible. In fact, it actually can look natural because they're at least coming from the same stone type. Incidentally, if you're wondering about the keyboard shortcuts I'm using just using the WSAD. They actually let you rotate between Unity built-in tools, which as you get used to doing them quickly will speed you up dramatically when you're doing big scenes like this. And this will just make your scenes look a bit better. We've only used one rock type so far. The other perk of doing things this way is that because you're only using one or a limited number of prefabs, we're actually not adding much to the download size because copies of the same object only counts once. So you can be quite economical with your space usage if you do rely on tricks like this. Okay, so we're making some progress here. What we will do is we'll go back to polybrush and we'll paint this whole thing up. Final thing that's worth touching on the terrain system today is the detail system. So as you saw here, we had the grasses. We've also got the ability to do details. Now details are basically meshes. So if I go for a rock and I look for a rock detail, like one of these rock small ones here, as you can see here, we've got a couple of them. I should be able to just place these down. And like the tree, we can actually paint these. As you can see, we can paint them, quite a lot of them, quite quickly. So with a large brush strength, set the target strength down to almost nil. I might set it a little bit higher than actually 0, but not too much higher. Size in this one too. It's probably a bit too small, but this will actually obey the randomization settings too. So we go. This is just another quick way of getting small little details and things into your scene. Now you can quickly swap these with any other object in the same category. So you can see here we can just go edit and find a new model. So I'm just going to find maybe that one. This one's a bit smaller, so I'll just set the scale up to 1. Particularly inside this riverbed, I might paint quite a bit more. These are quite efficient to render. These will batch very efficiently, and they will use instancing and all the other things that you might want to use, so you can actually paint down lots and lots of detail meshes here without too much of a performance worry. Quite a detailed amount, but as we add the water into here, and we'll do the water, this probably will be one area where I do break and use a paid asset. I've mostly resisted doing so here. Everything in here has been built using free assets or assets that I got on hand, but there is a tool called RAM, or River Auto Material. I don't think I've got it actually in this project already, and I will add it for next week's tutorial where I actually go into the water. But we'll just do a quick preview using the waterfall system. So I'll just drop waterfall in here, and you'll see, roughly speaking, how this will look. Now there's a small issue there that I've got a small flood. It's because I didn't raise that barrier up, but also because the mesh is quite low. disable adjustment displacement there, just so I can actually see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to raise the riverbank there. That was not what I wanted to do. I've got to be very careful with this. It can be a bit aggressive sometimes. And that'll raise it up as we go next week and we actually start using a river tool, because we'll paint down the waterfall and everything else here, which will bring us into particle systems. In fact, I did actually cover off one of those in one of my previous builds when I did the island build. I don't know if I actually showcased building the waterfall or not, but I'll actually explain how it's done, and we'll build a nice looking waterfall that runs down the side there. So actually have the river start somewhere up here, go all the way down and through here, and then keep on going. Okay, so I'm going to put a stop on this one here today because we're out of time, but we will pick this up next week and probably the week after as well. I'm guessing there's probably quite a few topics we can really drill into as we build up this scene and make it look fantastic. Thank you all for watching, and I look forward to doing it next week. See you.